Welcome to Notebook Summaries. You know, when we picture New York, we think steel, glass, skyscrapers, right? But its story, well, it actually begins with hills, streams, and a huge cultural collision. So in this explainer, we're going to dig deep and uncover the forgotten foundations of this incredible city. So the big question is, how did that happen? How did this swampy island, home to people for thousands of years, become the launchpad for a global metropolis in just a blink of an eye? Well, to figure that out, we can't start with skyscrapers or Wall Street. Nope, we've got to go way deeper, right down to the bedrock, to a piece of land that was almost destined for greatness. All right, first up, the land and its people. See, long before there was a New York, there was Manahatta, an island of many hills. Let's dive into what this place was actually like and who called it home. You know, the island itself was basically a geological jackpot. I mean, it had everything you could want: an incredible natural harbor, a whole network of rivers making it easy to get around, and even a huge freshwater pond. But its real secret weapon? That was buried deep underground. A super hard rock called Manhattan schist, which, as you can imagine, turned out to be the perfect foundation for all those skyscrapers to come. But of course, this land wasn't empty, not even close. For thousands of years, it was home to the Lenape people. They'd been in the region for about 3,000 years, and it's actually from their language that we get the island's very first name, Manahatta, meaning Island of Many Hills. And we're not talking about a small, scattered group of people here. When the first Europeans showed up, scholars figure there were about 15,000 Lenape living in the area. That's a huge number. They were spread out across something like 80 different settlements. This place was bustling. So how did they support that many people? Well, the Lenape were incredibly sophisticated land managers. They weren't just, wandering around hunting and gathering. No way. They were actively shaping their world. They used techniques like slash-and-burn agriculture to clear fields for crops, and they harvested just massive amounts of fish and shellfish from all the bays and rivers. Okay, so now the Dutch arrive. And this thriving world we've just talked about, it was about to change forever. But what's really interesting is that the Europeans didn't show up looking for conquest. Not at first. They were after something much more practical: money. So the first European to even lay eyes on the harbor was this guy Giovanni da Verrazzano, way back in 1524. But the real turning point was in 1609 with Henry Hudson. And get this, he wasn't looking for land to settle. He was looking for a shortcut to Asia. What he found instead was beavers. Tons of them. And in Europe, beaver pelts were like the Gucci of the day. That one discovery kicked off a massive fur boom, and just a few years later, the Dutch had set up their first trading post. And that brings us to one of the most famous and maybe one of the most misunderstood deals in all of history. In 1626, the Dutch director, a fellow named Peter Minuit, famously bought Manhattan from the Lenape. The price? A bundle of trade goods supposedly worth about 60 guilders. But here's the absolute key to understanding everything that happened next. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a complete clash of worldviews. To the Lenape, the idea of selling land was absurd. It was a shared resource like the air or the water. They probably thought they were just agreeing to share the island. The Dutch, on the other hand, they saw it as a cut-and-dry real estate deal. They bought it, they owned it, end of story. That one fundamental difference was a recipe for disaster. So with that purchase in the books, the Dutch set up a permanent town called New Amsterdam. And this kicked off an era of super fast growth, yeah, but also massive disruption, conflict, and eventually, all-out war. The entire economy of this new settlement was basically built on one thing: beaver pelts. You had this huge demand in Europe, so the Dutch traded things like metal swords and pots for the furs. But the trapping was so intense that the local beaver population was pretty much wiped out in just 20 years, and the fallout from that was huge. The Lenape suddenly became dependent on the Dutch for goods, completely upending their traditional way of life. And I want you to get this picture out of your head of a quaint little Dutch village. New Amsterdam was a gritty, diverse, rough-and-tumble company town. It was run by the Dutch West India Company, and their only goal was profit. They really didn't care where you came from as long as you could make them money. So right from the get-go, it was a wild mix of people: French, Spanish, Jewish, and African residents, including many who were forcibly brought there as enslaved laborers. That diversity was baked into the city's DNA from day one. Well, when your only focus is profit, conflict is pretty much inevitable. In 1638, a new director named Willem Kieft showed up, and his aggressive, frankly brutal policies just poured gasoline on the fire. This all exploded in 1643 with the horrifying Pavonia massacre, where Dutch soldiers murdered 80 indigenous people. That act of violence sparked a full-blown war. 11 local tribes actually banded together and fought back so hard they nearly wiped the Dutch colony right off the map before a shaky peace was finally signed. And the consequences for the Lenape people were just catastrophic. I mean, look at these numbers. Between new diseases they had no immunity to, starvation because their economy was destroyed, and people just fleeing the violence, their population absolutely plummeted. From about 15,000 people at the start of the 1600s to only around 200 left in the immediate area just a century later. It's staggering. Okay, time for the next big chapter. The era of Dutch rule. Filled with all this trade and turmoil, well, it came to a surprisingly sudden and quiet end. Imagine this. It's August 1664. You're a resident of New Amsterdam, and you look out into the harbor. And what do you see? 4 massive, heavily armed English warships. They've come to take over. Now, the Dutch governor at the time, Peter Stuyvesant, he was a really harsh guy. Nobody liked him. He had pretty much zero support from the city's diverse population. So when the English demanded he surrender, the people of New Amsterdam basically shrugged. Why would they fight and die for a governor they couldn't stand? They offered almost no resistance. Stuyvesant had no choice but to give up. And just like that, on September 8th, 1664, the Dutch flag came down and the whole colony changed hands without a single major battle. And that, right there, is how the city got its name. The English king gave the whole territory to his brother James, who was the Duke of York. So New Netherland became the colony of New York, and the city of New Amsterdam became New York City. Here's a really cool little detail about this city's identity crisis. For almost 300 years, the official city seal said the founding date was 1664, the year the English took over. But then, in 1975, the city decided to change it. They moved the date back to 1625, the year the Dutch incorporated it, as a way of honoring its true multicultural Dutch roots. So let's talk about the city's foundation and its legacy. Here's the most important takeaway. By the time the English showed up in 1664, all the foundational layers of the future New York City were already there. Its core DNA was pretty much set in stone. And you can still see these Dutch footprints all over a modern map of the city. So many iconic names are just English-sounding versions of the original Dutch. Brooklyn? That comes from Brooklyn. Harlem from Haarlem. The Bowery was once Boerij, which just means farm in Dutch. The Dutch government was gone, but their mark on the land was permanent. So when you boil it all down, the city's true identity was forged in this really short, chaotic period. You had the rich, amazing land of the Lenape providing the stage, you had the relentless profit-at-all-cost drive of the Dutch providing the economic engine, and you had its status as a diverse port for immigrants providing the people. Those 3 layers, they fused together to create the unique DNA of New York City, an identity that honestly still defines it to this day. So with its Dutch commercial roots now under new English rule, what kind of city was New York going to become? Well, this changeover set the stage for centuries of more conflict, explosive growth, and constant reinvention. If you want to see how other American cities got their start, definitely check out our full U.S. City Histories playlist. And for more deep dives just like this one, make sure you subscribe to Notebook Summaries. Thanks for joining us.